and welcome to the Monday edition of Big Talk, college sports with a Midwest perspective, blue collar and blue blood. I am Sam Sprunger, as always, joined by Tony Hollinsworth. Tony, how are we on this Monday?
Doing great. My coach is now the winningest Big Ten coach in basketball in history for the Big Ten. It's great.
Okay.
It's a great day. It's a great day.
Only took him 30 plus
Bobby
years.
Knight. Hey, look, it's not how fast you finish the race. It's if you finish the race.
Yeah, well,
and he finished
Tom
the race.
Izzo does take the top spot as all-time winningest coach in Big Ten games history. But we'll talk about that a little in just a few minutes. But Tony, it's a busy all over the place Big Ten season. We're getting to the point where we're getting into the last couple of weeks of the season. So 3 weeks, I believe, is what we've got left. And my goodness, it is crazy how things play out. Right now, we've got Michigan in first.
Yep.
After a win against Purdue at home and then on the road against Ohio State. But then you got Michigan State at 11-3. Then you have Purdue and Wisconsin, both with 4 losses. Then you have Maryland and UCLA, both with 5 losses. Then you have the kind of the surprising team for me is Illinois, who still can play a part in who wins this regular season, Big Ten regular season. 9-7. And it kind of goes down from there a little bit more. But my goodness, and how these teams have gotten their losses is just another one of those insanely crazy style of how did we get here? Minnesota 5-9 in the Big Ten, 13-12 overall. I'm impressed by what they've been doing lately, even though they're 5-9 in the Big Ten.
Right. And that's kind of the other crazy thing too. When you look at these standings, like you said, when you get to Illinois, they're at 9-7, and then everybody else has a losing record. But then you look at the records that they're at, they're not necessarily bad. Nobody truly has a losing record. Everybody is either at 500 or just above, at least in their overall standings and overall record wise. But yeah, Minnesota over here, 5-9. You and I talked about it just before the show started. I just want to point out, not only does Minnesota beat USC apparently in football, but beats them in basketball too. So it's safe to say that Minnesota owns USC at the moment. So,
well, at this point, yes.
I mean, that apparently must be their kryptonite is the Golden Gophers, and we can't even put temperature into that either. That's the bad part, because when they played them in football, it was still pretty nice fall weather. So,
and it was in LA as well, I believe.
Was it?
I believe it was
in Minnesota.
I believe it was in LA. You look that up while I make this statement. Of the 18 teams in the conference, there's only one with a losing record, and that's Rutgers, and they're 12-14. They've dropped 3 in a row, so they had a winning record up before this show where they're now 12-14. But that just to me says, look at what the conference is doing. They're playing some good basketball. They're beating up on each other, don't get me wrong. But goodness gracious, our top 6 teams kind of stand out, and then from there it's a big conglomeration of every other team.
Yeah. By the way, it was in Minnesota, and it was on October 5th. Okay. It was in Minnesota.
Fair. Okay.
I was right. But hey, you got me on the fact of I thought almost everybody had a either tied or somewhat winning record, and you're right. Rutgers did fall to 12-14, because it seems like, even though they're still, it's going to sound really hurtful to say, they're kind of skidding like skid marks on really bad underwear. Oregon finally seemed to turn it around maybe a little bit against this, last night's win against Rutgers, which, albeit not necessarily the most impressive or necessarily sexy win, still a win nonetheless, especially compared to where Oregon first started. They were kind of a powerhouse. They were ranked really high. They got some really big wins, at least initially. They beat Alabama. They lost pretty badly to Illinois, really badly. Then they go on like a 5-game losing streak. losing to Nebraska, Michigan, and Michigan State. But now they've since rallied. They got 2 wins, both against Northwestern and Rutgers. Now, albeit that's at home in Oregon. But then they get another 2 tough tests because they have to go on the road to Iowa, and then they have to go on the road to Wisconsin, who your Boilermakers just had to deal with. Now, albeit they got to deal with them at home and ended up losing by 10. But nonetheless, so, if I remember correctly, you and Mike DeCourcy talked about it, that this is a Wisconsin team that, and I've even felt this, they're always kind of that dark horse in the Big Ten. They can play with almost anybody that is in the conference at any given time. You can never overlook the Badgers whenever either you're going to Madison or if they're coming to you. You cannot overlook them, because if you do, it'll be at your own peril.
We talked about we're going to talk about this on Believe in Purdue, but not to give too much of what we're going to talk about away. But Wisconsin missed 2 2-point shots Saturday against Purdue. Not in the first half, not in the second half, not in the last 2 minutes. The entire 40 minutes, 2 2-point shots. They shot 61.5% from the field. They missed 20 total shots, and 18 of them were 3-pointers. That's a really hard way to play against a team, because there were multiple times, and again, we'll talk about it and Believe in Purdue, which follows us right here on the Lounge Sports Network streaming. It's the backcourt for Wisconsin put together 60 points. That's just the guards, the 3 starting guards.
So John really Tanji. John Tanji with 32 points just by himself.
Yeah,
I mean,
so at the point on you're making, yes, they're a good team, but when you have lights out like that, there's not many teams, I don't think, in the country that would play with that and play well against that, because Purdue put 84 points on the board and lost by 10.
Yeah, and they did that at home too, which again
correct
says a lot to the talent and the depth that Wisconsin has to be able to do that to a team that Purdue's only lost 2 games at home. I mean, when you look at, you kind of talked about all the way down to Illinois, even just before that, these top 6 teams in the Big Ten have really separated themselves as far as if you have to play them in their stadium at their place, you may not be coming out with a win, because Illinois sitting there, they're 11-4 at home. After that, the only person that has more than 1 loss is Purdue at home. And again, that's not taking anything away from Purdue.
Right.
That just shows you the level of how difficult it is. I mean, Maryland's sitting there at 15-1. UCLA's right behind them at 13-1. Wisconsin and Michigan State are 12-1, and then Michigan's the only one that's still technically undefeated at home at 12-0 right now. So that's kind of the other thing that people need to realize too with these teams is it gets more difficult when you have to travel on the road. But again, good on Wisconsin, because realistically, Wisconsin's only 5-4 on the road, and same with Maryland. So it does make a difference too for some of these teams as they leave. You miss that home court advantage, because the fans and that atmosphere play a lot that go into it. But like you said, when everybody is clicking, when everything's going the way it's supposed to go, and like you said, when you have 3 guards that can combine score 60 points, there's not a whole lot of teams that are going to be able to counter that.
Well, in Wisconsin, to go back to you when Mike right now, Wisconsin's playing great basketball. They've won 4 in third place, so they're a half a game into 4th. They're toying with maybe having that Big Ten, at least a share of that Big Ten title, fall into their laps. And it's not because they lucked out. It's now they're playing really good basketball, and this is where we're running into. They're going to have, maybe they're going to be more losses in these top slots. Can Purdue run the rest of the table and go undefeated? Sure, they can. I don't know how likely it is. I don't know, especially with tomorrow's game at the Breslin Center. Michigan State, they're probably going to lose one, maybe two more. Michigan, probably one or two more, if not maybe three, because they've got Illinois and Michigan State twice, and the rest of their schedule is not a cakewalk. So it really is a thing to look at, that there could be, and I said this a couple of weeks ago. I really think the best you're going to see is a 5-loss Big Ten champion this year. I really do think that.
Well, it's very possible because, I mean, you look at Michigan State's schedule just by themselves. Like you said, they take on Purdue. They have to face Michigan twice. And in between that, they have to go to Maryland. They have to host Wisconsin. Then they have to go to Iowa. I'm not going to say it would be completely out of the realm for them to potentially lose all 6. I don't know if that may happen.
I don't think
it's very
that'll happen,
possible. But again,
happen,
looking at that schedule, again, you can't overlook Purdue, even though you're hosting them. That's not somebody you can overlook. Like we've kind of talked about all season. And again, I'm still skeptical just because of past unsuccess of Michigan. But even then, I can't dismiss the fact that they're 12-0 right now. They're leading the Big Ten. If I have to relook at their schedule or their record, they're 20-5. Yeah, they're 20-5 right now. So I mean that's not somebody you could just overlook. With those
in the next 6 games, they play Michigan State twice, at Nebraska, against Illinois, and home to Maryland.
Yep. And they also host Rutgers too.
Yeah, but I'm not.
You're not counting them as a difficulty?
I'm not saying that they couldn't lose to them. I'm just saying the difficult portion of there is all but Rutgers. They could lose to Rutgers. I'm not saying they can't. I'm just saying, if there's a one that you would say, oh yeah, they should win that, no problem, it would be the Rutgers game.
Yeah, definitely. And so I mean this. And like you said, even with Purdue has a tough schedule coming up. And then, like much to your point, Wisconsin, I feel like Wisconsin kind of has the easier stretch though, for them to, like you say, potentially get a, share of the Big Ten. Because you look at Wisconsin's schedule, they host Illinois, Oregon, and Washington, all 3 in a row. Then they travel to the Breslin Center to take on Michigan State on March 2nd. Then they go to Minnesota, and then they end the year hosting Penn State. I mean, out of those 6 games, what is it unrealistic to say they could potentially go 5-1, maybe 4-2 at the absolute worst?
4-2 puts them at 6 losses, so that would they would have to hope for some help from somebody. I think they lose. I think they lose two games in this.
Think so?
In this group, again, Illinois is in that, and they're the next game. They play tomorrow against Wisconsin. It's in Madison, but Illinois has got an offense. They have an offense that can produce, and they can score a lot of points, and they can win ball games. It's a matter of, can they get over whatever it is that makes them trip up against not the bad teams, but the lower half teams. Yeah. Can they withstand? I mean, they had Michigan State dead to rights with about 6 minutes to play, and then Michigan State went on a 17-0 run and won the game by 15 points.
Right.
But it's definitely one of those teams that you can say Illinois is not a pushover. Oregon is a difficult one, but Oregon's coming to Madison, so I don't know that that's going to be a big problem. But I see Michigan State as being a very tough one. And don't count out the way Minnesota's playing and saying, oh, well, they're going to beat Minnesota pretty easily. Minnesota has been playing some decent ball, even though, we mentioned that they're in the lower half of they're 5-9 overall in the Big Ten. But they've beaten some teams that they shouldn't have to get those 5 wins.
Yeah, I mean, they have a win over Michigan, and they have a win over Oregon both, and that was when Oregon was ranked number 15 in the country. So, right. I mean, it is possible. And I mean, for them too, they don't necessarily have a bad schedule either. Now they do have to go to UCLA, so they're basically just going to stay out there in LA. That game is also tomorrow night at 10:30. So if anybody's going to stay up super late to watch that, but then after that they host Penn State, who is on a 7-game losing streak as it stands. They host Northwestern, who again kind of on the downslope. Now they have to go to Nebraska, who Nebraska also kind of sneaking in there a little bit. I mean,
17-9 overall.
Yeah, and they're 7-8 in the conference. So again, they're not doing great, but they're also not necessarily doing bad, and they're 10-3 at home. Then of course they host Wisconsin, and then they finish having to go to Piscataway to take on Rutgers. But kind of the same thing. I'm gonna all but call this season a wash for the Scarlet Knights, unfortunately for them.
The kick about Rutgers is they still have 2 lottery picks on their roster, and if they both click at the same time, whatever team they're playing is in trouble, because when you have 2 extremely great talents like both of them, like Bailey and Harper, if they start going off and you can't do anything to stop them, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse and worse for you. It just is.
And here's what's funny. Even as of today, on the 17th of February, the ESPN predictor, and keep in mind this game isn't until March 9th, it has Rutgers a 69% chance of winning against Minnesota.
Yeah, that doesn't
at least as
surprise
of
me
right
at
now.
all. That doesn't surprise me at all. So, all right, well, let's take a quick break for the audio podcast, and we'll be right back. You're listening to Big Talk on the Believe and Lounge Sports Network. All right, we are back. Long break there, Tony.
Very long break.
Hopefully you chose your your activities wisely and didn't overexert yourself.
I don't know. I'm pretty tired now. I could probably take a nap, to be honest with you. His long break is like summer break, honestly. Guy used to staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning and then not having to get out of bed till like 2 in the afternoon.
Oh gosh. My goodness, mister. You're just full of all sorts of fun stuff, aren't you?
Always.
So let's take a look at some of these games that are taking place tomorrow and maybe even on Wednesday to see, just kind of how this is, what games are happening immediately that could really play a part in what the conference tournament looks like, what the final standings of the regular season looks like. You just ignore Purdue travels to East Lansing. I'm going to get your input on this, because if you want to hear my input, I need you to stick around for Believe in Purdue.
I was say, you got anything else?
What?
I say, you got anything else?
What? Purdue and Michigan State. What do you think?
Yeah. Oh, okay. I said I didn't know. I didn't know what else you had with that. I was like,
that's it. Just what are your thoughts?
I don't know. I'm gonna be honest. I feel like this is kind of a coin flip game, and I say this just because of how both teams have been performing here of late. Michigan State has lost 3 of their last 5. They lost to USC. They lost to UCLA. They beat Oregon. They were upset by IU, but then they were able to go to Illinois and they were able to take care of business. And then on the other hand, like you pointed out, Purdue has lost their last 2 in a row, surprisingly enough. And I don't think anybody expected that at all. And we kind of talked about this, earlier in the season, where I thought Purdue would probably not necessarily take a step back, but probably come back down more to earth compared to what they have been, losing a player like Zach Edey to the NBA draft and whatnot. And, they've lost 2, albeit a 10-point loss isn't necessarily close. It is closer than what we've seen some games end up being. And they only lost by 2 to Michigan in Ann Arbor. So I really do
not producing any points from the bench.
Right. So I do feel that it's a coin flip, because I feel like both of these teams have the potential to really run the gauntlet, and I feel like they could honestly take on any of the best teams in the country and potentially win. Now, when it comes to facing each other, again, it's one of those, with it being a Big Ten, with it being a big rivalry, with it being the game that almost everybody has always had circled on their calendar for the last 3-4 years at least, with how dominant Purdue has been, with just the history of Tom Izzo, what he's been able to do with his team and whatnot. It's like, okay, what does Michigan State do? And it's in the Breslin Center. And same thing, as of right now, ESPN gives Michigan State a 61% chance of winning. I'm going to say it's just 50-50. I'm going to say it's going to be decided by less than 5 points on whoever wins.
Well, I'm this information I won't even bring up on Believe in Purdue, because we go deeper into it a little bit more. But right now, if you just go by team stats right now, Purdue averages 78.7 points a game. Michigan State averages 79.3. Purdue gives up 69.8 points a game. Michigan State gives up 67.5. Both of them shoot in the high 40s. Purdue's almost 50% from the field. Michigan State is 48 or 6.7. The rebounds, Michigan State out rebounds or has 40.5. Purdue's only at 30. The assists are almost a wash. The blocks are more to Michigan State. Purdue gets more steals, and I think honestly it's who gets out to the faster start. That's not necessarily faster start into most points, getting that lead stretched out. I do think it is who is able to execute their game plan to more extent than the other. And I think that if they can get and I will say this on Believe in Purdue as well, but if you can keep the zone out of it, I think that gives you a markedly bigger chance at winning.
Yeah. And I think, too, the other thing, much to your point, it's not only a matter of who gets out kind of to the hot start and who's able to get their game plan implemented. I think the other key thing that's going to be a major part of this is what happens after halftime into that second period, of who makes the adjustments, who can potentially disrupt maybe a very well implemented game plan, or okay, what tweaks have they made? What tweaks have we made to potentially make that counter? And kind of the same thing, who gets out to more of a hot hand and a quick start in that second period, I think is going to be what determines the outcome of that game, and if it's going to be close or if it is going to be a potential blowout or not.
Another big matchup, and we kind of brushed upon that before when we were talking about Wisconsin's remaining schedule. Illinois travels to Madison. That's an 8:30 start on FS1, 8:30 Eastern Standard Time. And that's a game that they're also giving Wisconsin. ESPN's got a Wisconsin at 61.6% chance of winning. These guys are really close in their comparative margins too. So Illinois averages 84.3, Wisconsin 81.5. They're really close to one another. The Illinois rebounds the ball a little bit better, and that kind of is a big deal, because if you get anybody that if you're missing shots, goodness, if you can rebound the ball, it's obviously giving you a better chance. I mean, duh. But at the same time, that is something that that Illinois does better than Wisconsin, and you've just got to. If the Illini could throw a wrench in what Wisconsin's doing right now, they really could.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's possible. Again, this is a team, like we've talked about. They're so hot and cold, and they're a team that they can absolutely play with anybody. And I think it's just one of those, they've either played down, or they've just made too many of their own mistakes to kind of hurt themselves to be able to really rebound back from. And I mean, heck, even being a Michigan State fan for the last few years, that was something I saw, at least with Michigan State, it believe it or not, it was a discipline thing. I'd watch them commit, 13, 14, 15 fouls in a night. And it's like, you can't give up those free points just because of the fouls. I mean, heck, that's up to, 20, 30 points every time that you do that. It's like, okay, well, you're just giving them 20, 30 points in a game, and you're having to dig yourself out of that hole from that point from moving forward. So I feel like that's kind of what Illinois is in. Again, they have that potential, and like you said, looking at their points, what they allow, just about everything is a wash, or they're really close to mirroring each other. We'll give them that. But again, I think if there's anything that we've noticed as far as a trend and how everything goes, the fact that it's at Wisconsin and that's already a hard place to play anyway, I kind of agree. I think I would take the Badgers in that I'm going to take them by at least 6.
Ooh. Then jump to Thursday. After the Wisconsin Illinois game, the rest of the games up until Friday, but we'll have a Friday show, unlike this last week where we had technical difficulties
Just a couple
that prevented us from getting a Friday show in. But the Friday there is a big game in
Maryland,
in Ann Arbor. But Thursday, Maryland hosts USC, and I bring that up because USC is one of those teams. They beat Michigan State at home. They normally play a little bit better on the road. Now they've had some injuries, and some players missed some games for injuries, but they're not impossible to hang an L on you. But it's really hard to go into College Park and win, especially with the way Maryland's been playing lately.
And especially with the fact that, like I kind of alluded to earlier, Maryland's 15-1 at home. Like, again, aside from Michigan being undefeated, they have the best record of being undefeated at home. And at least, again, as of right now on the matchup predictor, ESPN has given Maryland an 82.8% chance of winning over USC's 17.2%. And now it is funny, too, because if you look at everything else on here, the points and the points allowed are really the biggest thing that is an absolute night and day difference for both teams. USC only scores about 76.6%, and then they allow just under 73. Maryland scores almost 83, and they allow almost 67. Field goal percentage, they are exactly the same at 48.3. Maryland does rebound a little bit more, and they get better blocks and more steals. But yeah, USC has made some surprises. They were able to beat Michigan State and whatnot, and that's the beauty of college basketball. Any given night, any given time that it happens. But again, just given what Maryland is able to do, at least in College Park and whatnot, I wouldn't be surprised if the Terps beat the Trojans. I'm gonna say they beat them by 10.
On paper, this is absolutely not a matchup. This is not one that you would even say is even somewhat interesting, to tell you the truth. But having seen what can happen with some of these teams, I've brought it up multiple times on both of my shows, or both of the shows. Illinois went out to Eugene when the Ducks were the 9th-ranked team in the country and handed them the worst loss by any top 10 rated team ever. 31. I believe they beat them by 31 or 30 plus. I do know that. Then they came back a week later and got beat by USC at home by 10.
They beat Oregon by 32. It was 109 to 77.
So, but then a week later they came home and got beat by USC. So I'm not dragging USC and saying, oh, they're horrible. It's just they're not a traditional, like, you don't see, even when they were in the Pac-12, they weren't hey, they have good seasons. They just
yeah.
What I'm saying.
It is one of those, and again, we talked about it on other episodes. If your school typically isn't good at football, it's probably a basketball school, and that's USC, and Maryland is a little bit on the other side. Again, like you said, they have seasons where football's really good, basketball might be really good, or football's really bad, basketball might be really bad. But historically, Maryland's a basketball school, USC's a football school. Typically doesn't end up matching up well.
Well, that brings us to the end of this Monday edition of Big Talk. Tony, go ahead and let people know where they can find us.
You can find us on Facebook at Big Talk. That's B1G Talk. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and X, all at B1G_Talk. That's Big Talk with an underscore talk. You can find us on the All Sports All Plays network at least twice a week. Like Sam said, sometimes we have technical difficulties, so we don't know which days, but you will for sure get 2 episodes typically.
Monday, Friday is supposed to be the days.
Typically a week you will get from us. And then Sam is nice enough, and you had best believe that he will upload the podcast wherever you would like to get your podcasts at, both on the Believe Podcast Network as well as the Lounge Sports Network, which falls under the Lounge Media Group.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming in to Big Talk College Sports with a Midwest Perspective, blue collar and blue blood. For Tony Hollinsworth, I'm Sam Sprunger. We'll see you on Friday this time.